Hello everybody, Mannix here. Got a little knife versus video for you right here, right now. Feel free to subscribe, hit that little bell notification if you do not want to miss weekly knife and gun videos. Let's get right into this. This is going to be on the Kershaw hatch and the Cold Steel Range Boss. Now, these are very similar yet very different folding knives, but I think it's a very interesting comparison. I think a very apt comparison because they're in a similar price range and they have very similar profiles despite looking a little different. They're both lockback style folders. They're both very slim. Their handle materials are pretty much the same and their price ranges are pretty much the same. We do have some very, very different blade shapes as well as very, very different blade steels, however, but our locking mechanisms technically are different, despite me just saying they're both lockback style folders. But a lot of you from seeing both of these already know what I'm talking about. Let's get the specs out of the way. I'm going to start with our Kershaw hatch. Blade length is 3.15 inches. Its thickness is 0.097 inches. Handle length is 4.2 inches, making the overall length 7.35 inches. Weighs 2.6 ounces. Handle material is GFN with flush-mounted stainless steel liners. And the blade steel is D2 with a two-tone finish. Looks like we have satin on the main grind, and then right up here where you can see the thumb stud, it's a stonewash. Dual thumb studs, lockback, tip-up carry, loop-over pocket clip. It is swappable to the left side. Retails at $71.99. You can get these for a little over $40 as far as I've seen as of early 2024. Moving on to the Cold Steel Range Boss. Blade length, 4 inches. Handle length, 5.25 inches. Overall length, 9.25 inches. Blade thickness, 3.5 millimeters. Weighs 3.4 ounces. Zyx handle scale. In previous videos when I've talked about the Range Boss, I said it has no steel liners. Technically, that's not true. There are actually steel liners. If you look closely, they don't take up the entire surface of the inside of the handle scales, but they run along the spine of the handle scale. So it's kind of like half steel liners. You can see them right in there, but they are flush mounted. Certainly less steel in there compared to the ratio, anyway, of handle to steel liners that the hatch has. But technically, they both have steel liners inside of them. 4116 SS steel, stonewash finish, tip-up carry. It comes with a second pocket clip you can use to attach to the left side. Just borrow the screws from this guy, put it away, and then stick the lefty clip on there if you choose to do so. Retails at $51.99, a good $20 less, but in the aftermarket, you see these going for the high 30s. Generally speaking, you'll save $5, if you're lucky, maybe $10 in comparison to the hatch by Kershaw. Triad locking mechanism as opposed to the standard lockback that the Kershaw hatch is wearing. Clip style blade. This is currently the only blade style they offer the Range Boss in. I would love to see a Tonto at some point, but our Range Boss is longer, a little bit heavier, a little bit cheaper, has a much stronger locking mechanism. Handle materials are more or less the same. GFN, Zyx. It's just basically another name for glass and plastic mixed together. They're both tip-up carry. They both have dual thumb studs. They're both ambidextrous. But we have a D2 blade steel on our hatch, 4116 on the Range Boss. It's interesting because we have a higher quality, a much higher quality blade steel on our hatch, but a much weaker locking mechanism on it. And again, it's a little bit more expensive. More or less, they're in the same price range, I would say, but especially considering the MSRP, our hatch is a little bit more. Certainly a softer, cheaper blade steel on our Range Boss, but that is reflected in the price. You're paying less and you are technically getting more material here. Bigger knife, bigger blade, longer handle, bigger, beefier, stronger locking mechanism, but the blade steel is considerably a lower quality, but you're saving some money. So it's really going to come down to preference, but I think that's very interesting. We have a worse blade steel, pretty much, but a much stronger locking mechanism on this knife. And then, of course, blade style comes into play too. Very, very different blade styles. Cleaver, clip point. Cleavers are going to be all about chopping. That's what they excel at. Very bad at piercing and stabbing, but that's not what their calling is for. They have a very, very strong tip, if you will. Almost a 90-degree angle here. The clip blade is obviously going to be weaker as far as its tip is concerned in comparison to the cleaver, but it will be better at piercing. That being said, our blade on the hatch is considerably thinner too. So despite it being a lot more wide, it's considerably more thin. It's kind of an oxymoron knife to me. Cleavers are touted to be very strong, but because this is so thin, kind of reduces a lot of that strength the cleaver otherwise could have. But that being said, if they made this, let's say, a clip style blade at this same thinness, that would be even weaker than what we have here already, so maybe I can't really judge it for that. It certainly is very, very lightweight. Both very, very lightweight knives, but our hatch gets a point for being even more light, being even more small, more covert. They both deploy just fine, no issues with either of them. Opening them conventionally, opening them quickly, no problems at all. Both very fast for lockback style folders anyway, that's pretty impressive. I like these fat thumb studs the hatch has. Fat, wide thumb studs, just cool looking. They're not as obtrusive to me, they don't poke out as much, they just take up more surface area versus our range boss. Actually, those are pretty fat thumb studs too. It's just the way they're overall designed. These are just more cylindrical with very little tapering. These on the hatch taper a lot more. I just like the way they're designed a little bit more, but it's really not a big deal at all. Texturing on the handle scales is quite different. On a range boss, it's almost like a skateboard tape type grip. It's very, very, very grippy. I really, really like it. I like super grippy handle scales, especially considering the knife is so slim. If it's slim, I'm going to usually want some kind of a traction plan to help my grip. I mean, if I have a beefier handle and it's more hand filling and I can make more contact on there, I can be more confident with the grip. But when it's skinny like this, I like it when knife companies throw on a very abrasive texture to kind of compensate for its lack of thickness. This guy, the hatch, pretty similar story, also very slim. In fact, it's just ever so slightly more slim than our range boss. But this texturing is really nice too. It's less aggressive, but it's more refined. I really like this pattern right here. It's a bi-directional, almost cascading looking pattern I haven't really seen very often. And we have a nice little attention to detail, these lines inside of the handle, almost like little windows containing the texturing. It's really, really cool. It's very nice. Overall, very good looking knife. I'm going to give the point a hatch for aesthetics, although that basically means nothing. It just seems a little bit more proprietary to me. I like the way this pocket clip looks. Has a nice, almost a bright bead blasted finish. Very interesting. We have rounded hardware, and the steel liners have little windows cut out for them to poke out. They just look nice and elegant. Nice backspacer right there. Everything's nice and rounded. A little jimping up here on the lockback, jimping up here on the spine of the blade, which works okay. Pretty good. Actually, not bad at all. A lot of attention to detail going on this thing. And the blade's beautiful. I love the two-tone finish on there. It's very, very nice. Range boss is a little bit more plain Jane, but I still think it's good looking. It's stonewash. I feel like I can't go wrong with that. I really like stonewash finishes. And there's some sort of cutouts up here. You know, aesthetically, it's kind of cool. Doesn't really do a whole lot for texturing, almost at all. I can feel them there, but it's I guess it's better than not having any jimping whatsoever, but you're not really going to be able to really lock your thumb in. But whatever, aesthetically, it looks nice, and you might as well put it on there rather than nothing at all, I suppose. Pocket clip. The pocket clip is not what I would call good out of the box. Typically, I've had 2 of these range bosses so far, and both times the pocket clips were way too tight. Combination of a very tight pocket clip as well as a super abrasive texture, they'll shred your pockets up. You need 2 hands to not only extract, but probably insert it into your pocket. These were just extremely tight. Yours probably will be too. I don't know if Cold Steel changed that since, but I loosened it myself. I actually took it off the knife, grabbed it with some pliers, bent it upwards, just with my thumb. Actually, I wouldn't recommend that. I would use 2 tools. I have a video on how you can do that. But you can see my skin poking right through there from the very top of the texturing of the handle scale and the very bottom of the pocket clip where it's supposed to land right there. That was not there before. It used to be pressed down there a lot more. I just loosened that up. Now it's got a pretty good tension. Not a whole lot's going to be poking out there, but the Kershaw hatch easily, it just has a better pocket clip, I think. It's loop over, and also it's kind of protruding past the handle. So you're going to be seeing something kind of like that as far as a difference in pocket clips are concerned. Certainly more covert on the hatch, although I will say it does protrude out more. It's kind of obtrusive. It pokes out all the way out here. It's very, very flared out, actually. It also makes you think you would want this to be grinded down just a little bit, but it works like a dream. It carries very, very well. It's just this does protrude out a bit. It might scratch your car, might get caught onto things. I haven't had that problem yet, but what I will say is this is certainly a lot more covert, this sort of waved clip we have on the range boss. But again, out of the box, it's horrendous. It's just way too tight. So overall, I'm still just going to give a point to the hatch's pocket clip as well. So our hatch is smaller, which is not necessarily better or worse. This is different depending on what you're doing. It's lighter, which I'm going to say is better. The pocket clip is loop over and not horrendously tight out of the package. That's another good thing it's got going for it. It's got D2 instead of 4116 SS. I'm just going to say that's better. That's more valuable. It'll retain an edge a lot longer than the 4116, despite the fact that it will rust and corrode on you a little easier than the 4116 may. But overall, it's certainly a more valuable, harder steel. So I'm still just going to give it a point for that as well. Blade shape is purely subjective. It just depends on what you're trying to do. But overall, for this profile, for this shape, for these types of knives we have right here, I think the cleaver, and I said this on my review of the hatch, but it's kind of contradictory. Again, because it's so thin, it's so light, and we have such a massive, wide, strong style blade attached to it. It's kind of ironic. It's an ironic knife to me. You'd think a cleaver would be on a much bigger, beefier, chunkier, heavier knife that's meant to withstand harder use, but this knife is not. It's a lighter, medium-duty blade, kind of similar profile to the Spyderco Endula, like a small Endura or a big Delica, whatever you want to call it. Not really intended for super hard use. It could do pretty hard use. It's a lockback. It's got liners in there, you know, but it is very, very thin. So I still would not call this a hard use folder. It's medium use, maybe. So the blade shape, even though I do like the cleaver a lot, I'm still going to give a point to the Range Boss instead. I think the Range Boss has a better blade shape for this overall profile and what it's trying to be. Aesthetically, I think it's really, really cool having the cleaver on there. It's just different. It's interesting. But practically speaking, I think we're doing better with the clip on the Range Boss. Texturing, although it's much more aggressive on the Range Boss, it's still good on the hatch. I'm not going to say either of them wins. It's just going to depend on your preference. Do you want something really, really grippy, or do you want something a little bit nicer and friendlier? They both still work. They're both not too slick or too rough or anything like that. So I think neither one gets a point for texturing. It's just up to preference. Locking mechanism, well, hands down, the Range Boss is also going to win for that. Easily. Triad lock is one of the strongest locking mechanisms in the world, and it's so well executed on so many cold steel knives, including this Range Boss. The blade still comes flying out the handle. It's still fast enough. Super, super strong. Easily much stronger. Not just because it's a lot thicker. It's almost twice the size there. But this one does not have an integral stop pin because it's just a standard lockback. And another thing is the lockup on this hatch is not very impressive. Even for a lockback, there is lock rock there. It's been there since I got this knife new. Yeah, sure, it'll get broken in over time, but lockbacks generally just need a little bit of wiggle room for them to function properly anyway. But that being said, I've had lockbacks that had basically no play. This one's kind of a sloppy lockup. Not really impressed with that at all, actually. So not only a weaker locking mechanism in theory, but in execution, it's just weaker. It's overall a weaker, smaller, lighter, flimsier, thinner knife. Strength, easily the Range Boss is going to win, despite not even having fully flush-mounted steel liners in there. Now, overall value, which one is the winner here? Let's first recap. More aggressive texturing on our Range Boss, a little bit more fine texturing on our hatch. Pocket clip is really, really tight out of the package for the Range Boss. Pocket clip tension for the hatch is just fine. It's also loop over, so it's going to be more covert. Both of them are swappable to the left sides, and they're both lockback style folders. So again, that including the dual thumb studs, they're both completely ambidextrous. Overall, I'm just going to give a point for carry on the hatch, including the fact that it's also lighter weight and slimmer. So for overall EDC purposes, our hatch is going to win. It's just more compact. It's more slim. It's lighter. Just as a friendlier pocket clip, a friendlier texturing, better for EDC, despite it being a cleaver style blade. I don't know, maybe it's a way to compensate for the fact that the blade is so thin. That's possibly what they were going for here. Yeah, for EDC purposes, a cleaver is actually totally fine. Usually you don't have to pierce or stab during everyday carrying tasks, as far as I know. So honestly, despite it looking kind of strange for an EDC knife, I think it actually is a perfectly fine EDC knife. And again, we have D2, which will last a lot longer than 4116 before you finally have to resharpen it. But the Range Boss is a bigger, heavier, longer knife with a way stronger locking mechanism. Its blade steel is just a lot lower quality. But you're also paying a little bit less. Even if these were both the exact same price, I'd still want to say it's a pretty fair matchup because the range boss, we have more material and a much, much stronger locking mechanism. So it's kind of just going with, do you want a blade that's going to last longer, that's going to take a longer time before you have to resharpen it, or do you want the knife that's stronger? For defense, easily the range boss is going to be our winner here. It's just stronger, it's longer. Blade steel, I really don't give a crap about blade steel when it comes to defense, because if you keep your blade nice and sharp, as long as it's got a good heat treatment on there, it'll be just fine. Overall, I'm not going to say there's a winner here. For everyday carry, I do like the hatch just a little bit more for all the reasons I just explained. And it is a nicer looking knife, nicer presentation, very pleasing, very aesthetic. And it's not an expensive knife either, but I wouldn't call it cheap for what you're getting. I don't like its kind of flimsy, weak lockup. But other than that, I like pretty much everything else about the knife. It's really cool. It's a really cool, fun little EDC knife. And it has D2 on there, and it's not terribly expensive. Range Boss is absolutely one of my favorites, though, because you're just getting so much value here. Despite the blade steel not being quite as good as D2 or even close, not only are we saving some money, we're just getting a better tactical blade. You know, more texturing, more reach, way stronger locking mechanism. I have nothing to really complain about it. Overall, both very cool knives. I just thought it would be a very interesting comparison, despite these having a lot of differences in them. In a lot of ways, they're similar too, I think. What do you think of either of these knives? Are there any pros and cons I may have missed in this video? Any advantages or disadvantages you see? Which one would you pick? And for what? Leave a comment down below. See you next time. Mannix out.